When Elara Vale's mysterious prison letters reach the most dangerous man in New York, she never imagines he'll come looking for her. But Lucien DeMarco doesn't just find her, he owns her. Her dead father's debt, her terrified silence, her fragile heart. Now the ruthless crime lord offers her an impossible choice: become his wife or watch everything she loves burn. One trembling girl, one violent empire. And a forced marriage that will either destroy them both or save them. Follow this story to the end. Hit like and comment your city so I can see how far this tale has traveled. Inmate. The rain hammered against the bookstore windows like fists demanding entry. Elara Vale stood behind the register, her fingers wrapped so tightly around a worn paperback that her knuckles had gone white. Outside, the Brooklyn street blurred into streaks of yellow taxi lights and dark umbrellas. But she wasn't watching the rain. She was watching the black sedan that had been parked across the street for the past 20 minutes. Her throat felt tight. Her chest rose and fell in shallow, rapid bursts. They wouldn't come here. Not here. But the certainty she tried to force into her thoughts felt as fragile as wet paper. The bell above the door chimed. Elara flinched so violently she nearly dropped the book. Her eyes snapped toward the entrance, and for a split second her vision swam with panic. But it was just Mrs. Chen, the elderly woman who came in every Thursday for romance novels. The old woman shook out her dripping umbrella and smiled. "Terrible weather tonight, dear." Elara's voice came out barely above a whisper. "Yes, terrible." Mrs. Chen wandered toward the back shelves, humming softly to herself, and Elara forced her attention back to the register. Her hands were shaking. They'd been shaking for 3 days now, ever since the letter arrived. She'd burned it immediately, torn it into pieces, lit a match in the alley behind the store, and watched the paper curl into black ash. But the words had already carved themselves into her memory. Your father's debt does not die with him. She swallowed hard and glanced at the clock. 15 more minutes until closing. Then she could lock the door, turn off the lights, and disappear into the small apartment above the shop where she'd lived alone since her father died 2 years ago. 2 years. And she'd almost believed the nightmare was over. Almost. The bell chimed again. This time, Elara's entire body went rigid. 3 men stepped inside. They moved with the kind of confidence that made the air in the room feel heavier, like gravity itself bent around them. The first was tall and broad-shouldered, his suit jacket stretched tight across his chest. The second was leaner, with a scar running down the side of his neck. The third, Elara's breath caught. The third man was different. He didn't need to be the biggest or the loudest. He simply was. Dark hair swept back from a face that could have been carved from stone, sharp jawline shadowed with stubble, and eyes, cold, calculating eyes, that moved across the bookstore like a predator scanning for prey. When those eyes landed on her, Elara felt her knees weaken. She knew who he was. Everyone in New York knew who Lucien DeMarco was. He'd been released from prison 6 weeks ago after a mistrial that shocked the city. The media had called it a miracle. The prosecutors had called it corruption. The underworld had called it inevitable. Because men like Lucien DeMarco didn't stay locked up. They bent the world to their will, even from behind bars. And now he was standing in her bookstore. Elara's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Her fingers gripped the edge of the counter so hard her nails dug into the wood. Lucien moved toward her with slow, deliberate steps. His men stayed near the door, blocking the exit. Mrs. Chen, oblivious, continued humming somewhere in the poetry section. When Lucien reached the register, he stopped. For a long, suffocating moment, he just looked at her. Then he spoke, and his voice was low, rough, like gravel dragged across concrete. "You're Elara Vale." It wasn't a question. She nodded once, a tiny, jerky movement. "You wrote to me." Her heart slammed against her ribs. I don't know what you're... Don't lie to me." The words weren't loud, but they cut through the air like a blade. Elara flinched, and something flickered across Lucien's face, something that looked almost like surprise. He leaned forward slightly, resting one hand on the counter between them. His fingers were scarred, the knuckles rough and uneven. "You sent me letters, for 2 years, every week, under the name A Friend in the City." Elara's stomach dropped. "Oh, God. I didn't..." Her voice cracked. "I didn't think you'd... You didn't think I'd come looking for you?" Lucien's gaze didn't waver. Those letters kept me sane. You think I wouldn't find out who sent them? She shook her head frantically, her breath coming faster now. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have. I didn't mean to. Why did you stop? The question caught her off guard. She blinked, confusion breaking through the panic for just a second. What? You stopped writing 6 weeks ago. His jaw tightened. The day I got out. Why? Elara's mouth went dry. She couldn't tell him the truth. She couldn't tell him that she'd been terrified of what would happen if he ever found her, that the letters had been her father's idea before he died, a desperate attempt to earn favor with the DeMarco family, to buy a little more time before the debt came due. She couldn't tell him that every word she'd written had been a lie designed to keep a monster calm. Except it hadn't felt like a lie. Not entirely. She swallowed. I thought you wouldn't need them anymore. Lucien stared at her for a long moment, and Elara felt like she was being pulled apart under the weight of that gaze. Then, slowly, he straightened. You're not what I expected. She didn't know what to say to that. I expected someone bold, confident. His eyes moved over her, the oversized cardigan swallowing her small frame, the way she hunched her shoulders like she was trying to make herself smaller, the faint tremble in her hands. But you're terrified of me. It wasn't a question, but Elara nodded anyway. Something dark crossed Lucien's face. He tilted his head slightly, studying her like she was a puzzle he couldn't quite solve. You wrote to me for 2 years. You told me things no one else would, about books, about the city, about hope. His voice dropped lower. And now you can't even look me in the eye. Elara forced herself to meet his gaze, even though every instinct screamed at her to run. I'm sorry, she whispered. Stop apologizing. The command was quiet, but it made her flinch again. Lucien exhaled slowly, something almost like frustration flickering across his face. Then he reached into his jacket. Elara's entire body went cold. Her vision tunneled. She couldn't breathe. But when Lucien's hand emerged, it wasn't holding a gun. It was holding a folded piece of paper. He set it on the counter between them, his expression unreadable. Your father borrowed $3 million from my family before he died. Elara's legs nearly gave out. She gripped the counter harder, her knuckles white. I know, she managed, but I can't. I'm not here to collect the debt. She blinked. You're not? No. Lucien's eyes locked onto hers. I'm here to offer you a deal. Elara's pulse hammered in her ears. She didn't trust herself to speak. Lucien leaned in again, close enough that she could see the faint scar cutting through his left eyebrow, the way his jaw tightened like he was holding something back. Marry me. The world tilted. For a second, Elara thought she'd misheard him, but the look on his face, cold, serious, unyielding, told her she hadn't. What? The word barely made it past her lips. Marry me, Lucien repeated, his voice steady. And the debt disappears. Elara shook her head, panic surging through her chest. I don't understand. You don't need to understand. He straightened, his expression hardening. You just need to say yes. Why? The question burst out of her before she could stop it. Why would you? Because I want you. The bluntness of it stole the air from her lungs. Lucien's gaze didn't falter. You wrote to me like I was human, not a monster, not a weapon. Human. His voice dropped, rough and raw. No one's done that in a long time. Elara's mind spun. This didn't make sense. None of it made sense. She was nobody. A quiet bookstore clerk who lived in a tiny apartment and spent her nights reading novels because she was too afraid of the real world to live in it. And Lucien DeMarco was, I can't, she whispered. His expression darkened. You don't have a choice. Yes, I do. She forced the words out even as her voice shook. I can say no. Lucien's jaw clenched. For a moment she thought he might walk away, but then he leaned forward again, and this time his voice was low enough that only she could hear it. If you say no, the debt transfers to you. My enemies will come looking for payment, and they won't care that you're innocent. His eyes bored into hers. You'll disappear within a week, and no one will ever find your body. Elara's breath hitched. But if you say yes, Lucien continued, his voice softening just slightly, I'll protect you. No one will touch you. No one will hurt you. Her vision blurred. She couldn't tell if it was from tears or panic or both. I need an answer. Elara looked down at the paper still sitting on the counter, the contract that would bind her life to his. Her hands trembled violently. She thought about her father, about the letters she'd written in his name after he died, trying to keep the DeMarco family from coming after her, about the quiet life she'd built here, surrounded by books and silence and safety. It was all about to end. Okay, she whispered. Lucien's eyes narrowed. Say it clearly. She forced herself to meet his gaze, even though her entire body was shaking. I'll marry you. For a long moment, Lucien just stared at her. Then slowly, something shifted in his expression, something she couldn't quite name. Good. He picked up the paper and tucked it back into his jacket. We leave tonight. Tonight? Elara's voice cracked. But I need time. You don't have time. Lucien stepped back, nodding toward his men at the door. Pack what you need. You have 10 minutes. 10. Panic clawed at her throat. I can't just... 10 minutes, Elara. The way he said her name, low, firm, final, made it clear there would be no argument. Elara's legs felt like they might collapse beneath her, but somehow she managed to nod. Lucien turned and walked toward the door, his men falling into step behind him. But before he left, he paused and glanced back over his shoulder. One more thing. Elara's breath caught. Don't try to run. His voice was calm, but there was steel beneath it. Because I will find you. Then he was gone. The bell above the door chimed softly in his wake, and Elara stood frozen behind the counter, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. Mrs. Chen emerged from the poetry section, holding a stack of books. Oh dear, did those men bother you? They looked terribly serious. Elara couldn't answer. She couldn't move. Because her life, the quiet, invisible life she'd built, had just been ripped away, and she had 10 minutes to say goodbye to everything she'd ever known. Elara's apartment was small. One bedroom, a cramped kitchen, a bathroom with a cracked tile floor. But it had been hers. Safe. Quiet. Now as she stood in the doorway with the duffel bag slung over her shoulder, it felt like a tomb. She'd packed quickly. Clothes, a few books, the photograph of her father she kept beside her bed. Her hands had shaken so badly she'd dropped things twice. Her mind kept racing, looping over the same terrified thoughts. This isn't happening. This can't be happening. But it was. The black sedan was waiting outside when she descended the narrow staircase. Lucien stood beside it, his expression unreadable in the dim streetlight. When she approached, he opened the back door without a word. Elara hesitated, her fingers gripping the strap of her bag. Get in. His voice wasn't cruel, but it wasn't kind either. She climbed inside. The leather seat was cold beneath her. One of Lucien's men, the one with the scar, sat in the driver's seat. The other took the passenger side. Lucien slid in beside her, and the door shut with a heavy, final click. The car pulled away from the curb, and Elara watched through the rain-streaked window as the bookstore disappeared behind them. For a long time, no one spoke. The city blurred past. Lights and shadows, people hurrying through the rain, lives continuing as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed, at least for her. You're shaking. Elara turned her head. Lucien was watching her, his expression still unreadable. I'm cold, she lied. He didn't argue, but she could tell he didn't believe her. After another stretch of silence, he spoke again. You'll have your own room. You won't be touched unless you want to be. Elara's breath caught. She didn't know what to say to that. This marriage is on paper, Lucien continued. For now. But in public, you're mine. That means you stay close. You don't talk to strangers. You don't go anywhere without security. She nodded numbly. And you don't lie to me. His voice dropped. I don't care how scared you are. If I ask you a question, you tell me the truth. Elara swallowed. Okay. Good. The car turned onto a bridge, and the glittering lights of Manhattan spread out before them. Elara had only been to the city a handful of times, always briefly, always nervously. Now she was being taken into its heart, into Lucien's world. The penthouse was on the top floor of a building so tall it made her dizzy just looking up at it. The lobby was all marble and gold, with security guards stationed at every entrance. They nodded at Lucien as he passed, their eyes flicking briefly to Elara before looking away. The elevator ride felt endless. Elara stared at the floor, her heart pounding harder with every passing second. When the doors finally opened, she stepped out into a space so vast and luxurious it didn't feel real. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city. The furniture was sleek and modern, all sharp lines and dark leather. Everything gleamed, glass tables, polished floors, steel accents. It was beautiful, and it felt like a cage. "Your room is down the hall," Lucien gestured toward a corridor on the left. "Second door." Elara nodded and started walking, her legs stiff and unsteady. She pushed open the door he'd indicated and stepped inside. The room was larger than her entire apartment. A king-size bed sat against one wall, draped in white linens. There was a desk, a closet, a private bathroom. Everything was pristine, untouched. She set her duffel bag on the bed and stood there staring at it. This is real. This is happening. A soft knock at the door made her jump. Lucien stood in the doorway, his jacket removed, his sleeves rolled up to his elbows. He looked almost normal, like a man, not a monster. "You should eat something." Elara shook her head. "I'm not hungry." He studied her for a moment, then stepped inside. "You haven't eaten all day, have you?" She didn't answer. Lucien exhaled slowly, running a hand through his dark hair. "Look, I know this isn't what you wanted, but you're here now, and I'm not going to let anything happen to you." Elara finally looked at him, really looked at him. Up close, she could see the faint circles under his eyes, the tension in his jaw, the way his shoulders carried weight she couldn't begin to understand. "Why did you really come looking for me?" she asked quietly. Lucien's expression shifted. For a moment, he looked like he might not answer. Then, finally, he spoke. "Because your letters were the only thing that felt real." The rawness in his voice made her chest ache. "I spent 2 years in a cell," he continued, "surrounded by men who wanted me dead. And every week your letters showed up, talking about books, about rain, about stupid, ordinary things." His gaze locked onto hers. "You made me remember what it was like to be human." Elara's throat tightened. "So when I got out," Lucien said, his voice dropping, "the first thing I wanted was to find you, to see the person who'd kept me alive." She didn't know what to say, didn't know how to process the fact that this terrifying man, this crime lord, had been clinging to her words like a lifeline. "I'm sorry I stopped writing," she whispered. Lucien's jaw tightened. "Don't apologize." "But I said don't." The sharpness in his tone made her flinch, and immediately his expression softened. "Elara." He stepped closer, and she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "You don't need to be afraid of me." "I'm afraid of you," she said, the truth slipping out before she could stop it. Lucien's eyes darkened. "I know." And then, to her complete shock, he reached out and gently, so gently, tucked a strand of her hair behind her ear. "But I'm going to fix that." Before she could respond, he turned and walked out, closing the door softly behind him. Elara stood frozen in the middle of the room, her heart racing, her skin still tingling from the brief touch. And for the first time since this nightmare began, she wondered if maybe, just maybe, she'd misjudged him. The days that followed blurred together. Elara barely left her room. Meals were brought to her by silent staff members who never made eye contact. She spent hours staring out the window at the city below, watching tiny figures move through streets she could no longer walk. Lucien didn't force her out. He didn't demand anything from her. But she could feel his presence, always close, always watching. On the third night, she ventured into the living room. Lucien was sitting on the couch, a glass of whiskey in one hand, his attention fixed on a laptop screen. He looked up when she entered, and something flickered in his eyes. "Couldn't sleep?" Elara shook her head. "It's too quiet." He raised an eyebrow. "Too quiet?" "I'm used to the city noise, the sirens, the traffic." She wrapped her arms around herself. "Here, it's silent." Lucien studied her for a moment, then closed the laptop. "Sit." She hesitated, then perched on the edge of the couch, keeping as much distance between them as possible. For a while, neither of them spoke. Then Lucien's voice broke the silence. "Tell me about the bookstore." Elara blinked. What? Your bookstore. You worked there for years, didn't you? She nodded slowly. Since I was 22. Why books? The question caught her off guard. She'd expected him to ask about the debt, about her father, about anything but this. Because they're safe, she said quietly. You can disappear into them. Become someone else. Live a different life. Lucien's gaze didn't waver. You wanted to disappear? Always. The honesty in her answer seemed to surprise him. He leaned back, his expression thoughtful. And now you're stuck with me. Elara didn't know how to respond to that. I'm not what you thought I'd be, am I? Lucien asked, his tone unreadable. She shook her head. No. What did you think I'd be? A monster. He laughed, a short, bitter sound. I am a monster, Elara. Don't mistake kindness for weakness. I don't, she said softly. But monsters don't ask about bookstores. Lucien's jaw tightened. He looked away, staring into his glass. Maybe I'm trying not to be one. The vulnerability in those words hit her harder than she expected. They sat in silence for a long time after that, the city lights glowing through the windows, casting shadows across the room. And for the first time since she'd been taken, Elara felt a small crack in the wall of fear she'd built around herself. The first gathering happened a week later. Lucien informed her over breakfast, a tense, quiet affair, where she picked at her food while he read through messages on his phone. We have an event tonight. Elara looked up. What kind of event? Business dinner. You'll need to be there. Her stomach dropped. I can't. You can. His tone left no room for argument. And you will. Lucien, I don't know how to... You don't need to do anything. He set his phone down and looked at her directly. Just stay beside me. Don't talk unless someone asks you a direct question. And if anyone makes you uncomfortable, you tell me immediately. Elara's hands trembled in her lap. Who's going to be there? People you don't need to worry about. That didn't make her feel better. By the time evening arrived, Elara was a wreck. A stylist had been sent to the penthouse, a sharp-eyed woman who barely spoke as she dressed Elara in a sleek black gown that felt far too elegant for someone like her. When she looked at herself in the mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back. Lucien was waiting in the living room when she emerged. He stood with his back to her, adjusting his cufflinks, and when he turned, Elara's breath caught. He looked devastating in a perfectly tailored suit, his dark hair swept back, his jaw sharp enough to cut. But it was the way his eyes locked onto her that made her heart stutter. For a long moment, he just stared. Then, quietly, he said, "You look beautiful." Elara's cheeks flushed. She didn't know how to respond. Lucien crossed the room in a few long strides and stopped in front of her. He reached out, his hand hovering near her waist. "May I?" She nodded, too nervous to speak. His hand settled gently on her lower back, and he guided her toward the door. "Stay close to me tonight. Don't leave my side." "Okay." The drive to the restaurant was silent. Elara's anxiety climbed with every passing block, her hands twisting in her lap. When they arrived, Lucien helped her out of the car, his hand never leaving her back. The restaurant was exclusive, dimly lit, with private booths and tables tucked into shadowed corners. But the moment they stepped inside, Elara felt every eye in the room turn toward them. Whispers followed in their wake. "That's Lucien DeMarco. Who's the girl? His wife?" Elara's chest tightened. She wanted to disappear, to run. But Lucien's presence beside her was steady, unyielding. They were led to a private room in the back, where a table had been set for 8. 3 men were already seated, their conversations dying the moment Lucien entered. "Lucien." One of them, a silver-haired man in an expensive suit, stood and extended his hand. "Good to see you." "Vincent." Lucien shook his hand, his expression unreadable. Then he turned slightly, his hand still on Elara's back. "This is my wife, Elara." The weight of those words hit her like a physical blow. Wife. Vincent's eyes flicked to her, appraising. "A pleasure." Elara managed a small nod, her voice trapped in her throat. They sat, and the dinner began. Elara barely touched her food. She couldn't focus on anything except the suffocating weight of attention pressing down on her. The men talked business, territory, shipments, money, and she tried to make herself as small as possible. But halfway through the meal, one of the men, a younger guy with a cocky smirk, leaned forward and looked directly at her. "So, Elara, how'd you land a guy like Lucien?" The table went quiet. Elara's heart hammered. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. The man's smirk widened. "Cat got your tongue? That's enough." Lucien's voice was cold, sharp. The man raised his hands in mock surrender. "Just making conversation. Make it with someone else." The tension in the room thickened. Elara could feel Lucien's anger radiating off him like heat. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur. When it finally ended, Lucien stood abruptly, his hand gripping Elara's elbow as he guided her out. The moment they were in the car, he exhaled sharply. "You okay?" Elara nodded, even though her hands were still shaking. Lucien's jaw tightened. "He shouldn't have spoken to you like that." "It's fine. It's not fine." His voice was so fierce that Elara turned to look at him. His expression was dark, his hands clenched into fists. "Lucien, no one disrespects you." His eyes locked onto hers. "Not in front of me. Not ever." The protectiveness in his tone made something shift in her chest, something she couldn't quite name, and as the car pulled away from the restaurant, Elara realized with a jolt of fear that she was starting to feel safe with him, which terrified her more than anything else. The weeks that followed the restaurant incident changed something between them. Elara still spent most of her time in her room, but the isolation felt less like safety and more like a slow suffocation. The penthouse was too clean, too perfect, too silent. Every surface gleamed, every corner was sharp, and everywhere she turned she could feel eyes on her. The staff, Lucien's men, the cameras tucked into corners she pretended not to notice. But it was Lucien's eyes that unsettled her most. He watched her constantly, not in a way that felt predatory, but something worse, something that felt almost tender, like she was fragile, breakable, worth protecting, and she hated how much she was starting to depend on it. 3 weeks into the marriage, Elara woke to find a box sitting outside her bedroom door. She opened it slowly, her fingers trembling against the crisp white ribbon. Inside were books. Not just any books, first editions, leather-bound, some so old the pages smelled of dust and time, titles she'd mentioned in passing during their late-night conversations, stories she'd told him she loved. He'd been listening. That realization made her chest tighten in a way she didn't want to examine too closely. She found Lucien in his office, bent over a desk covered in papers and maps. He didn't look up when she entered, but his shoulders tensed slightly. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For the books. You needed something to do." His voice was flat, businesslike, but there was something underneath it, something careful. Elara stepped closer, her fingers gripping the edge of her cardigan. "You didn't have to." "I know." The silence stretched between them. Lucien still hadn't looked at her. "Why are you doing this?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. Finally, he set down his pen and lifted his gaze. The exhaustion in his eyes startled her. Dark circles shadowed his face, and there was a tightness around his mouth she hadn't noticed before. "Doing what?" "Being kind to me." Lucien leaned back in his chair, studying her with an intensity that made her want to look away. "You think I'm being kind? Aren't you?" "No." He stood, moving around the desk toward her. "I'm being selfish." Elara's breath caught. "I don't understand." "You make this place feel less like a tomb." He stopped a few feet away, close enough that she could see the faint scar cutting through his eyebrow, the tension in his jaw. "That's not kindness. That's need." The rawness in his voice made something twist in her chest. She opened her mouth to respond, but the words died when one of Lucien's men appeared in the doorway. "Boss, we've got a problem." Lucien's expression shifted instantly, hardening into something cold and lethal. "What kind of problem?" "Victor's men were spotted near the east docks. They took out 2 of our runners." Elara watched Lucien's hands curl into fists. The air in the room turned sharp, dangerous. "Get everyone ready," Lucien said, his voice low and controlled. "I want them found within the hour." The man nodded and disappeared. Lucien turned back to Elara, and for a moment she saw something flicker across his face, something almost like regret. Go back to your room. Lock the door. Don't come out until I tell you it's safe. Fear spiked through her chest. What's happening? Nothing you need to worry about. Lucien. Elara. His tone was sharp enough to cut. Do what I'm telling you. She flinched and immediately his expression softened. He exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair. Please, just stay inside. I'll be back before morning. Then he was gone, his footsteps echoing down the hallway, leaving Elara standing alone in the empty office, with her heart pounding and fear coiling tight in her stomach. She didn't sleep that night. She sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the door, listening to the silence pressing down on the penthouse like a physical weight. Every small sound made her jump. The distant hum of the elevator, the faint creak of the building settling, the city noise far below. Hours passed. The darkness outside her window slowly gave way to the gray light of dawn. And still, Lucien didn't return. By the time the sun fully rose, Elara's nerves were frayed to nothing. She couldn't stay locked in her room anymore. She needed to know what had happened. If he was... She forced herself not to finish that thought. She found one of Lucien's men in the living room, Marcus, the one with the scar on his neck. He looked up when she entered, his expression unreadable. Where is he? Elara's voice came out steadier than she felt. Not back yet. Is he okay? Marcus hesitated, and that hesitation made her stomach drop. He's fine. You're lying. Miss Vale. Don't. She stepped closer, her hands trembling. Tell me the truth. Marcus studied her for a long moment, then sighed. There was a fight, east side. It got messy. How messy? 3 of theirs dead, 1 of ours injured. He paused. Boss took a hit, but he's walking. He'll be back soon. Elara's chest constricted. A hit? What does that mean? Means he got hurt, but not bad enough to stop him. The casualness in Marcus's tone made her want to scream. But before she could respond, the elevator chimed. Lucien stepped out. Elara's breath caught. He looked like he'd walked through hell. His shirt was torn and stained dark along the ribs. His knuckles were split and bleeding. There was a cut above his left eye, and the way he moved, stiff, controlled, told her he was in pain even though his expression revealed nothing. Their eyes met across the room. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Elara's legs carried her forward before her brain could catch up. She crossed the distance between them, her hands hovering uselessly in the air because she didn't know where to touch him, where it was safe. You're bleeding, she whispered. I'm fine. You're not fine. Lucien's jaw tightened. He looked like he was about to argue, but then his gaze softened slightly. It's just a scratch. You're covered in blood. Most of it isn't mine. The word should have terrified her, should have reminded her exactly who she'd married. But all she felt was a desperate, overwhelming need to make sure he was okay. Sit down, she said, her voice shaking. Please. Lucien stared at her for a long moment, something unreadable flickering in his eyes. Then, slowly, he nodded. She guided him to the couch, her hands barely touching his arm. Marcus disappeared without a word, leaving them alone. Elara's hand shook as she retrieved the first aid kit from the bathroom. When she returned, Lucien had peeled off his ruined shirt, and she had to force herself not to stare at the network of scars covering his chest and abdomen, some old and faded, others still pink and healing, evidence of a life spent in violence. She knelt in front of him, her fingers fumbling with the antiseptic. This is going to hurt. I've had worse. She pressed the gauze to the wound along his ribs, and Lucien didn't even flinch. His eyes stayed fixed on her face, watching her with an intensity that made her hands shake harder. You shouldn't be doing this, he said quietly. Someone has to. I have people who... I'm doing it. She met his gaze, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. Just let me. Lucien's expression shifted. Something vulnerable flickered across his face before he locked it down. Okay. They fell into silence. Elara worked carefully, cleaning the wounds, applying bandages, her fingers brushing against his skin with a gentleness that felt almost unbearable. She could feel his eyes on her the entire time, heavy and searching. When she reached the cut above his eye, she had to lean in closer. Her breath ghosted across his face, and she felt him tense beneath her touch. Hold still, she murmured. I am. You're staring at me. I know. Her heart hammered. Why? Lucien was quiet for a moment. Then, so quietly she almost didn't hear it, he said, because I've never had anyone take care of me before. Elara's hands froze. She looked down at him, at the way his dark eyes held hers with something raw and unguarded. Never? He shook his head slightly. People fear me, use me, try to kill me. His jaw tightened. But no one's ever just... He stopped, looking away. Elara's chest ached. Without thinking, she reached up and gently turned his face back toward her. Someone should. The vulnerability in his expression deepened. For a moment, he looked like a man barely holding himself together. Then his hand came up, covering hers where it rested against his jaw. His palm was rough, scarred, warm. You're not afraid of me right now, he said, his voice rough. I am. The honesty slipped out. But I'm more afraid of what would happen if you died. Something cracked in Lucien's expression. His thumb brushed across her knuckles, and the tenderness of the gesture made her breath catch. Elara. The elevator chimed again. They both froze. Lucien's entire body went rigid. His hand dropped from hers, and his expression shifted back into something hard and dangerous. He stood slowly, wincing slightly, and turned toward the elevator. A woman stepped out. She was stunning, tall with sleek dark hair, sharp cheekbones, and a body wrapped in a dress that probably cost more than Elara made in a year. But it was the way she moved, confident, predatory, like she owned the space, that made Elara's stomach twist. The woman's eyes landed on Lucien, and her red lips curved into a smile. Lucien, you look like hell. Natasha, his voice was cold. What are you doing here? I heard about the mess with Victor. She crossed the room, her heels clicking against the polished floor. Thought I'd check on you. Her gaze flicked briefly to Elara, dismissive, before returning to Lucien. I'm fine, Lucien said. I can see that. Natasha's smile widened. Though you might want to clean up before... She paused, her eyes landing on the bandages Elara had just applied. Oh, you already have someone playing nurse? The condescension in her tone made Elara's face burn. Lucien's jaw tightened. Natasha. Relax. The woman waved a hand. I'm not here to cause problems. I just wanted to remind you about the meeting tomorrow night. Victor's pushing back on the territory agreement, and we need to present a united front. I'll be there. Good. Natasha stepped closer to him, close enough that her hand could rest on his chest. And bring your little wife. It'll be good for people to see her. Elara's chest constricted. She watched Natasha's hand linger on Lucien's skin, right over the bandages she'd just carefully placed, and something hot and unfamiliar twisted in her stomach. Jealousy. She hated herself for feeling it. Lucien's hand came up, gripping Natasha's wrist and pulling it away from his chest. She's not a prop. Natasha raised an eyebrow. No, then what is she? My wife. On paper. The words hung in the air like a blade. Lucien's expression darkened. Get out. Natasha's smile didn't falter. Always so dramatic. She turned toward the elevator, then paused and glanced back at Elara. Nice to meet you, sweetheart. Try not to get too attached. Men like Lucien don't keep soft things around for long. Then she was gone. The silence that followed felt suffocating. Elara stood frozen, her hand still holding the first aid kit, her chest tight with emotion she didn't know how to name. Lucien turned to face her, and the look in his eyes was unreadable. She's wrong, he said quietly. Is she? Yes. Then what am I? The question burst out of her before she could stop it. Because I don't know anymore. I don't know if I'm your wife or your prisoner or just... Her voice cracked. Just something you own. Lucien's expression shifted, something almost like pain flickering across his face. He took a step toward her. Elara, don't. She backed away, shaking her head. I can't. I need to think. She turned and fled to her room before he could stop her. The door closed behind her with a soft click, and Elara collapsed onto the bed, her entire body shaking. She didn't cry. She couldn't. The emotions were too tangled, too overwhelming to break down into something as simple as tears, because the truth was, she didn't know what she was to Lucien. And worse, she was starting to care far too much about the answer. The next evening arrived too quickly. Elara stood in front of the mirror, staring at her reflection. The stylist had dressed her in a deep emerald gown that hugged her body in ways that made her deeply uncomfortable. Her hair was swept up, her makeup precise and elegant. She looked like someone else, someone who belonged in Lucien's world, but the fear in her eyes gave her away. There was a knock at the door. "Come in," she said quietly. Lucien entered and her breath caught. He looked devastating in a black suit, his hair perfectly styled, the cuts and bruises from the night before expertly concealed, but she could see the tension in his shoulders, the tightness around his mouth. His eyes swept over her, and something flickered in his expression, something that looked almost like awe. "You look—" He stopped, his jaw tightening. "Beautiful." Elara's cheeks flushed. "Thank you." They stood in awkward silence for a moment. Then Lucien spoke again, his voice low. "About yesterday. Natasha, you don't owe me an explanation." "Yes, I do." He stepped closer. "She's part of the business, that's all. There's nothing between us." "It doesn't matter." "It does." His eyes locked onto hers with an intensity that stole her breath. "Because I need you to trust me tonight." Elara's chest tightened. "Why?" "Because where we're going, it's not safe. And I need to know you'll stay close, that you'll do exactly what I tell you." Fear spiked through her. "What's going to happen?" "Nothing, if everything goes according to plan." His expression darkened. "But if it doesn't, Lucien, what are you not telling me?" He hesitated, and that hesitation terrified her more than anything else. "Victor's going to be there," he finally said, "and he's been looking for a way to hurt me since I got out." "Then why are we going?" "Because if I don't show up, it looks like weakness, and weakness gets people killed." His hand came up, cupping her face gently. "But I swear to you, nothing is going to happen to you. I won't let it." Elara wanted to believe him. She wanted to trust the certainty in his voice, but the fear coiling in her stomach wouldn't let go. "Okay," she whispered. Lucien's thumb brushed across her cheek, a gesture so tender it made her chest ache. "Let's go." The venue was a private club in the heart of Manhattan. Exclusive, expensive, dangerous. Men in expensive suits and women dripping with jewelry filled the space, their laughter sharp and their eyes calculating. Elara felt like prey walking into a den of wolves. Lucien's hand stayed on her lower back the entire time, a constant grounding presence. But even his touch couldn't calm the panic rising in her chest. They were led to a private section on the second floor, where a large table had been set with crystal glasses and expensive liquor. Several men were already seated, including the silver-haired Vincent from the restaurant weeks ago. And at the head of the table sat a man Elara had never seen before. He was older, maybe late 50s, with cold blue eyes and a smile that didn't reach them. Everything about him screamed danger, from the way he held himself to the way the other men deferred to him. Victor. Lucien. Victor's voice was smooth, cultured. "So good of you to join us, and you brought your lovely wife." His eyes slid to Elara, and she felt her skin crawl. Lucien's cut tightened on her back. "Victor, please sit." They sat, and Elara focused on keeping her breathing steady. The conversation started immediately. Business talk, territory disputes, shipment schedules. She tried to make herself invisible, but she could feel Victor's eyes on her every few minutes, assessing, calculating. Halfway through the evening, Victor leaned back in his chair and smiled at her directly. "Tell me, Elara, how are you enjoying married life?" Every head at the table turned toward her. Elara's throat went dry. "It's fine." "Just fine?" Victor's smile widened. "Lucien, you're not treating your bride well enough." Lucien's jaw tightened. "She's fine." "She doesn't look fine. She looks terrified." Victor's eyes gleamed. "Are you scared of your husband, darling?" Elara's heart hammered. She could feel Lucien's anger radiating beside her, barely controlled. "No," she managed. "Really? Because you're shaking." "That's enough." Lucien's voice was low, dangerous. Victor raised his hands in mock surrender. "Just making conversation." "Make it with someone else." The tension at the table thickened. Victor's smile turned cold. "Careful, Lucien. We wouldn't want your pretty little wife to see how you handle disagreements." Lucien stood abruptly, pulling Elara up with him. "We're leaving." So soon? Victor's voice followed them. The night is young. Fuck your night. They were moving toward the stairs when Victor's voice rang out one more time, sharp and cutting. Your father owed me money too, Elara. Elara froze. Lucien's hand tightened on hers, trying to pull her forward, but her legs wouldn't move. Did Lucien tell you that? Victor continued, his voice carrying across the room. That your father borrowed from both of us? That he promised me first? Ice flooded Elara's veins. She turned slowly, looking back at Victor. What are you talking about? Your marriage, Victor said, his smile cruel. It was supposed to be to my son. Your father promised you to us before he died. Lucien just got to you first. The world tilted. Elara's vision blurred. She looked at Lucien, searching his face for denial, for anger, for anything that would tell her Victor was lying. But Lucien's expression was carved from stone. Is that true? Her voice came out barely above a whisper. Lucien's jaw worked. Elara, is it true? It's complicated. The confirmation hit her like a physical blow. Her chest constricted, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. You knew. Her voice shook. You knew my father promised me to someone else, and you took me anyway. I was protecting you. From what? From him? She gestured toward Victor. Or from having a choice? Elara, listen to me. No. She yanked her hand free from his grip. You lied to me. You said the marriage was about the debt, but you just wanted to take me before someone else could. That's not. How am I supposed to believe anything you say? The pain in her voice made Lucien's expression crack. He reached for her, but she stepped back. Don't touch me. Victor's laughter echoed through the room, sharp and triumphant. Lucien's hands clenched into fists. For a moment, he looked like he might turn and kill Victor right there, but then his eyes locked onto Elara's face, and something in his expression shifted. We're leaving, he said, his voice rough. Now. He didn't wait for her response. He grabbed her arm, not roughly, but firmly enough that she couldn't pull away, and dragged her toward the exit. The car ride back to the penthouse was silent. Elara stared out the window, her entire body numb. She couldn't process what had just happened, couldn't make sense of the betrayal twisting in her chest. When they reached the penthouse, she walked straight to her room without a word. Elara, wait. She slammed the door. Seconds later, Lucien was pounding on it. Open the door. Go away. We need to talk about this. There's nothing to talk about. Her voice cracked. You lied to me. I protected you. By taking away my choice? She yanked the door open, fury and heartbreak warring in her chest. Do you even hear yourself? Lucien's expression was tortured. If Victor had gotten to you first, you'd be dead by now. His son is a sadist. He would have destroyed you. And what have you done? Tears burned her eyes. You've trapped me here. Made me dependent on you. Made me... Her voice broke. Made me care about you. Something shattered in Lucien's expression. I know, he said, his voice raw. I know what I did. And I'm not sorry. The honesty of it stole her breath. Because if I hadn't taken you, Lucien continued, stepping closer, you'd be suffering in ways I can't even describe. So yes, I lied. Yes, I took your choice away. But I'd do it again in a heartbeat if it meant keeping you safe. Elara's chest heaved. I hate you. I know. I wish I'd never written those stupid letters. Lucien flinched like she'd struck him. I don't. Why? The question came out broken. Why do you even want me here? Because he stopped, his jaw working like he was fighting against the words. Then, finally, roughly, he said, because you make me feel human. The vulnerability in his voice cracked something open in her chest. Lucien, and I know I don't deserve it, he continued, his voice getting rougher. I know I'm a monster. I know I've taken everything from you, but for the first time in my life, I don't feel empty. And I'm selfish enough to want to keep that. Elara stared at him, tears streaming down her face. I can't do this, she whispered. Yes, you can. No. She shook her head. I can't be here. I can't. I need space. Lucien's expression crumpled. Don't leave. I'm not leaving. I need time. He looked like he wanted to argue, to fight, to force her to stay. But instead he nodded once, stiffly, and stepped back. Okay. Then he turned and walked away, his shoulders rigid with tension. Elara closed the door and collapsed against it, her entire body shaking. Because the worst part wasn't that he'd lied. The worst part was that she understood why, and she was terrified of how much she still wanted to forgive him. The days that followed were suffocating. Elara stayed in her room. Lucien didn't push. Meals appeared outside her door, untouched. The silence in the penthouse felt like a living thing, pressing down on everything. On the fourth day, Marcus knocked on her door. "Miss Vale, you need to see this." Something in his tone made her blood run cold. She opened the door. Marcus's face was grim. "What happened?" "Someone left a package downstairs addressed to you." Elara's stomach dropped. "What kind of package?" Marcus's jaw tightened. "You should come see." She followed him to the living room, where Lucien stood beside a small box on the coffee table. His expression was carved from stone, but his hands were clenched so tightly his knuckles were white. When he looked up at her, his eyes were filled with barely controlled rage. "Don't open it," he said. "What is it?" "A message." Elara's heart hammered. She moved closer, her hands trembling. The box was plain, brown, unremarkable, but there was something dark staining the bottom. Blood. "Lucien, what?" He grabbed her shoulders, forcing her to look at him instead of the box. "Listen to me. Victor is escalating. He's trying to scare you, to make you doubt me, to make you run." "What's in the box?" "It doesn't matter. Tell me." Lucien's jaw worked. Finally, roughly, he said, "A finger from one of my men." Elara's vision swam. "Oh, God." "There's a note." Lucien's voice was flat, dead. "It says you're next." The room tilted. Elara's legs gave out, and Lucien caught her, holding her against his chest. "I'm not going to let that happen," he said fiercely into her hair. "Do you hear me? I will burn this entire city down before I let anyone touch you." But for the first time since this nightmare began, Elara realized something terrifying. Lucien couldn't protect her from everything, and Victor knew it. Later that night, Elara found Lucien standing in front of the windows, staring out at the city. His shoulders were rigid, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. She approached slowly, her heart hammering. "What are you going to do?" Lucien didn't turn around. "What I should have done weeks ago." "Which is?" "End this." His voice was cold, final. "Victor won't stop until one of us is dead, so I'm going to make sure it's him." Fear spiked through her chest. "Lucien's. He threatened you." Lucien turned, and the look in his eyes was terrifying. "He put your name on a death list. There's no coming back from that. But if you go after him, you'll start a war." "Good. People will die. Better them than you." The certainty in his voice made her chest ache. She crossed the distance between them, her hands reaching for his face. "Please don't do this." Lucien's expression softened slightly, his hands coming up to cover hers. "I don't have a choice." "Yes, you do." "No." His thumb brushed across her cheek. "Not when it comes to you." Elara's eyes burned. "Why? Why do you care so much?" Lucien stared at her for a long moment, something raw and vulnerable flickering in his eyes. Then, quietly, he said, "Because I'm in love with you." The words hit her like a freight train. Elara's breath caught, her hands trembled against his face. "You're what?" "I'm in love with you," Lucien repeated, his voice rough. "I have been for weeks. Maybe since the moment I walked into that bookstore and you looked at me like I was the most terrifying thing you'd ever seen." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "Lucien, I know you don't feel the same." His jaw tightened. "I know I've ruined any chance of that. But I need you to understand. Everything I've done, every lie I've told, it's been to keep you safe, because losing you would—" His voice cracked. "It would destroy me." Elara couldn't breathe, couldn't think. All she could do was stare at him, at the vulnerability carved into every line of his face. "Say something," he whispered. But before she could respond, the elevator chimed. They both turned, Marcus stepped out, his face pale. Boss, we've got a problem. Lucian's entire body went rigid. What kind of problem? Victor's men just took out the security on the east entrance. They're coming. The world stopped. Lucien's expression shifted instantly into something cold and lethal. He turned to Elara, gripping her shoulders. Go to the panic room. Now. What? No. Elara, this isn't a discussion. His voice was sharp, commanding. Get in the panic room, lock the door, and don't come out until I come get you. Lucian, I'm not leaving you. Yes, you are. He pulled her close, pressing a hard kiss to her forehead. I'll come back for you, I promise. Then he shoved her toward Marcus. Get her to safety. Marcus grabbed her arm, pulling her toward a hidden door in the hallway. Elara struggled, tears streaming down her face. Lucien! But he was already moving, pulling a gun from a hidden drawer, his entire body shifting into something dangerous and lethal. The last thing she saw before Marcus pulled her through the door was Lucien's back as he moved toward the elevator, ready to face whatever was coming. And the only thought screaming through her mind was that she might never see him. The panic room was a steel box buried deep in the heart of the penthouse. No windows, no light except for the cold fluorescent strips buzzing overhead. The walls were thick enough to muffle any sound from outside, which meant Elara couldn't hear what was happening beyond the door. She couldn't hear if Lucien was alive or dead. Marcus had shoved her inside with barely a word, his face grim and his hand already reaching for his weapon. The door had slammed shut with a heavy, final sound that made her chest constrict. Then the lock had engaged, a series of mechanical clicks that sounded like a death sentence. Now she was alone. Elara pressed her palms against the cold steel door, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. Her mind replayed the last image of Lucien, his back, his shoulders squared, the gun in his hand, the way he'd kissed her forehead like it might be the last time. I'll come back for you. I promise. But promises meant nothing when men were coming to kill you. She didn't know how long she stood there. Time felt warped in the windowless space, stretching and contracting in ways that made her dizzy. Her legs trembled. Her hands shook. Every breath felt like it was being dragged through broken glass. Then she heard it. A muffled sound. Distant. Like thunder rolling through a storm. Gunfire. Elara's entire body went rigid. She pressed her ear against the door, straining to hear more, but the walls were too thick. The silence that followed was worse than the sound itself, heavy, suffocating, filled with all the terrible possibilities her mind could conjure. Please be okay. Minutes passed, or maybe hours. She couldn't tell anymore. Then the lock disengaged. The door swung open, and Elara stumbled backward, her heart hammering. Marcus stood in the doorway. Blood streaked his face, his shirt torn at the shoulder. But he was alive. Is he? Elara couldn't finish the question. Boss is fine. They're gone. Relief hit her so hard her knees buckled. Marcus caught her arm, steadying her. Easy. How many? Her voice came out barely above a whisper. 4 of them. All dead. Marcus's expression was flat, emotionless, like he was reporting the weather. We lost 1 man, Johnson. Elara's stomach twisted. She'd seen Johnson around the penthouse, a quiet man with kind eyes who always nodded politely when she passed. Now he was dead, because of her. Where's Lucien? Living room. She pushed past Marcus, her legs unsteady, and rushed down the hallway. The penthouse looked like a war zone. Bullet holes pocked the walls. Glass from a shattered window glittered on the floor. Dark stains smeared across the marble. Blood that would never fully wash out. And in the center of it all stood Lucien. He was alive. Whole. His shirt was torn and stained, his face splattered with blood that didn't look like his own. But his eyes, when they landed on her, were haunted. You're okay. His voice was rough, strained. Elara crossed the distance between them in seconds, her hands reaching for his face, his shoulders, his chest, needing to confirm he was real, that he was here. Are you hurt? No. Lucien, I'm fine. But he wasn't. She could see it in the way his jaw tightened, the way his hands trembled slightly before he clenched them into fists. Johnson's dead, he said flatly. Because I wasn't fast enough. That's not your fault. Yes, it is. His eyes locked onto hers, and the pain in them made her chest ache. This is my world, my choices, my consequences, and good men keep dying because of it. Elara's throat tightened. What are we going to do? Lucien's expression hardened. I'm going to end this. Tonight. What does that mean? It means I'm going to Victor's estate, and I'm going to put a bullet in his head. His voice was cold, final. He came into my home, threatened you, killed my men. There's no walking back from that. Fear spiked through her chest. If you go there, he'll be expecting you. It's a trap. I don't care. Lucien, please. This ends tonight, Elara. He gripped her shoulders, forcing her to meet his eyes. I can't keep you safe while he's alive, so I'm removing the threat permanently. And what if you don't come back? Something flickered in his expression, something almost like regret. Then Marcus will take care of you, get you out of the city, set you up somewhere safe. I don't want Marcus. Her voice cracked. I want you. The confession hung between them, raw and vulnerable. Lucien's grip on her shoulders tightened. For a moment, he looked like he might pull her close, might kiss her, might say all the things she desperately needed to hear. But then he released her and stepped back. I need you to stay here. No matter what happens, you don't leave this penthouse. Lucien, promise me. She stared at him, her chest heaving. I promise. He nodded once, then turned to Marcus. Get everyone ready. We leave in 10. Marcus disappeared, and Elara was left standing in the ruined living room, watching Lucien prepare for what might be his last night alive. She couldn't let him go, but she didn't know how to stop him. Lucien left 20 minutes later with 6 men. Elara watched from the window as the cars pulled away, their taillights disappearing into the New York night. Then she was alone again, surrounded by the aftermath of violence and the suffocating weight of helplessness. She tried to sleep, failed. Tried to read, couldn't focus. The hours crawled past with agonizing slowness, each minute stretching into eternity. By 3 in the morning, her nerves were frayed to nothing. And still, Lucien hadn't returned. Elara paced the living room, her hands twisted together, her mind spinning through every terrible possibility. What if Victor had killed him? What if he was lying bleeding somewhere, alone? What if she never saw him again? The elevator chimed. Elara spun around, hope and fear warring in her chest. But it wasn't Lucien who stepped out. It was Natasha. Elara's stomach dropped. What are you doing here? Natasha smiled, but there was nothing warm in it. I came to check on you. Lucien asked me to. I don't believe you. Smart girl. Natasha moved further into the room, her heels clicking against the blood-stained floor. You're right, he didn't ask, but I thought you might want to know what's really happening tonight. Elara's pulse hammered. What are you talking about? Lucien didn't go to kill Victor. Natasha's smile widened. He went to make a deal. The words hit like a physical blow. You're lying. Am I? Natasha pulled out her phone, tapped the screen, and held it up. It was a photograph. Grainy, taken from a distance, but unmistakable. Lucien, sitting across from Victor at a table. No guns, no violence, just 2 men talking like old friends. Elara's vision blurred. I don't understand. Of course you don't. Natasha's voice dripped with condescension. Because Lucien's been playing you from the start. He never wanted to protect you, sweetheart. He wanted to use you. That's not true, isn't it? Natasha stepped closer. Why do you think he married you so quickly? Why do you think he keeps you locked up here like a pretty little bird in a cage? He's protecting me. He's controlling you. Natasha's eyes gleamed. Your father didn't just owe Lucien money. He owed him information about Victor's operations, about his weaknesses, and when your father died before he could deliver, Lucien needed another way in. Elara's chest constricted. No. He married you to legitimize his claim to everything your father promised, and he's been using you as bait ever since. Why do you think Victor's so interested in you? Because Lucien wants him interested. He's been dangling you in front of Victor like a piece of meat, waiting for the right moment to strike. You're lying. But Elara's voice shook because pieces were clicking together in her mind. The way Lucien had insisted she attend public events, the way he'd kept her visible, exposed, the way he'd known Victor would target her. Am I? Natasha held up the phone again. This photo was taken 2 hours ago. While you were sitting here, terrified and alone, Lucien was making deals with the man who wants you dead. Elara's legs gave out. She sank onto the couch, her entire world tilting. What kind of deal? The kind where you're the bargaining chip. Natasha's voice was almost gentle now, which made it worse. Lucien's offering to hand you over to Victor in exchange for peace. Victor gets his revenge for your father's betrayal. Lucien gets to keep his empire intact. Everyone wins. Except me. Except you. Natasha crouched in front of her, her expression surprisingly sympathetic. I'm sorry, sweetheart. I know you thought he cared about you, but men like Lucien don't love. They use. And right now, you're the most valuable thing he has to trade. Elara couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The walls felt like they were closing in. Why are you telling me this? Because I don't like watching innocent people get sacrificed. Natasha stood, smoothing her dress. And because I'm giving you a choice Lucien never did. You can stay here and wait for him to hand you over. Or you can run, right now. I have a car waiting downstairs. I'll get you out of the city, set you up somewhere safe, no strings attached. Elara stared at her. Why would you help me? Because I've seen what Victor does to the women he gets his hands on. Natasha's expression darkened. And no one deserves that. Not even naive little bookstore clerks who write love letters to criminals. The cruelty in those last words stung, but Elara barely felt it. Her mind was spinning too fast, trying to make sense of everything. Could it be true? Had Lucien been using her this entire time? She thought about the way he'd looked at her, the tenderness in his voice when he said he loved her, the way he'd protected her, held her, taken care of her wounds. But she also thought about the secrets, the lies, the way he'd taken her choice away from the very beginning. Everything I've done has been to keep you safe. Or had it been to keep her controlled? I need proof, Elara whispered. Natasha sighed. There's no proof beyond what I've shown you. You either trust me or you trust Lucien. But you need to decide now, because once he gets back, you won't get another chance. Elara's hands trembled in her lap. Every instinct screamed at her to wait for Lucien, to hear his side, to believe in the man who'd held her so carefully. But fear was louder than instinct, and Natasha's words had planted seeds of doubt that were growing roots. Okay, Elara heard herself say. I'll go. Natasha's smile was triumphant. Smart choice. Get whatever you need. We leave in 5 minutes. Elara stumbled to her room on shaking legs. She grabbed her duffel bag, the same one she'd packed the night Lucien had taken her from the bookstore, and threw in clothes, the photograph of her father, the books Lucien had given her. Her hands paused on one of the books, a first edition he'd tracked down because she'd mentioned it in passing. She stared at it, her chest aching. He's been using you. She shoved it in the bag and zipped it shut. When she returned to the living room, Natasha was waiting by the elevator. Ready? Elara nodded, even though nothing about this felt ready. They descended in silence. The lobby was empty at this hour, the security guards conspicuously absent. Natasha led her to a black car idling at the curb, its windows tinted dark. Get in, Natasha said. Driver will take you to a safe house outside the city. You'll have cash, new documents, everything you need to disappear. Elara hesitated, her hand on the car door. Something felt wrong, but she couldn't identify what. Thank you, she whispered. Natasha's smile didn't reach her eyes. Don't thank me yet. Elara climbed into the back seat. The door shut with a heavy click, and the car pulled away from the curb. She watched through the rear window as the penthouse building disappeared behind them, and tried to ignore the way her chest felt like it was caving in. The car drove for 20 minutes, but instead of heading toward the outskirts of the city, they went deeper into Manhattan, into neighborhoods Elara didn't recognize. Dark streets lined with warehouses and industrial buildings. Fear spiked through her chest. Where are we going? The driver didn't answer. I said, where are we? The car stopped abruptly. The doors locked with an audible click. Elara's blood turned to ice. She tried the handle. It wouldn't budge. Let me out! The driver got out, walked around, and opened her door from the outside. 2 men she'd never seen before grabbed her arms and dragged her from the car. Elara screamed. She fought, but they were too strong. They hauled her toward a warehouse entrance, her feet scraping against the pavement. The door opened, and she was thrown inside. The space was vast and empty, lit by flickering industrial lights. Water dripped somewhere in the darkness. The smell of rust and decay filled her lungs, and standing in the center of the warehouse, waiting for her, was Victor. Elara's heart stopped. Victor smiled. "Hello, Elara. So glad you could join us." "What?" Her voice came out broken. "What is this?" "This is what happens to foolish girls who trust the wrong people." Victor gestured to someone behind her, and Natasha stepped out of the shadows. Elara stared at her, betrayal and horror crashing over her in waves. I told you I was giving you a choice," Natasha said calmly. "You chose to run. That made this much easier." "You lied," Elara's voice shook with rage. "Everything you said, the photo, was real." Natasha pulled out her phone and showed the screen again. But this time, Elara looked closer. The angle, the distance, the graininess that could hide digital manipulation. It wasn't proof of anything except Natasha's skill at deception. "Lucien wasn't making a deal," Elara whispered. "He was trying to kill me," Victor finished. "Yes, and he almost succeeded, but I had contingencies, including her." He nodded toward Natasha. "She's been feeding me information for months, and when I realized you were Lucien's weakness, I knew exactly how to use it." Elara's legs gave out. The men holding her let go, and she collapsed to her knees on the cold concrete floor. "He's going to come for me," she said, forcing the words out even as terror clawed at her throat. "I'm counting on it." Victor's smile widened. "Do you know why Lucien went to my estate tonight? Because I sent him a message saying I had leverage on him. He thought I was bluffing, but now—" He gestured to Elara. "Now I actually do." "He'll kill you." "Maybe." Victor crouched down to her level, his cold blue eyes boring into hers. "But first he'll have to watch me break you, piece by piece, until there's nothing left of the shy little girl who wrote him letters." Elara's vision blurred with tears, not from fear, though fear was there, cold and sharp, but from the crushing weight of her own stupidity. She'd run. She'd doubted. She'd believed the lies. And now Lucien was going to pay the price. "Don't worry," Victor said, standing. "I'll make sure he arrives in time to see the best parts." He nodded to his men, and they grabbed Elara again, dragging her toward a chair in the center of the warehouse. They tied her wrists with rough rope that bit into her skin, tied her ankles, made sure she couldn't move, couldn't run, couldn't do anything except sit there and wait for whatever horror was coming next. Victor pulled out his phone and typed something. "There. Message sent. Lucien should be here within the hour." Elara's chest heaved. She tried to steady her breathing, tried to think, tried to find some way out of this nightmare. But there was nothing. No escape. No miracle. Just cold concrete and the smell of rust and the terrible certainty that everything was about to get so much worse. "You made a mistake," she said quietly. Victor raised an eyebrow. "Did I?" "Lucien doesn't negotiate. Not when it comes to people he loves." "Then I suppose we'll see just how much he loves you." Victor's smile turned cruel. "Let's find out if you're worth dying for." An hour passed, then another. Elara sat tied to the chair, her wrists raw from the rope, her body aching from staying in one position too long. Victor paced nearby, occasionally checking his phone. Natasha had disappeared into the shadows. The warehouse felt like a tomb. And then, finally, the sound of a car approaching. Victor's smile returned. "Right on time." The warehouse door burst open. Lucien stormed in with Marcus and 3 other men, their weapons raised. But the moment Lucien saw Elara tied to the chair, everything stopped. His face went white, then red, then something beyond rage, something that looked like pure devastation. "Let her go!" His voice was barely controlled. "Or what?" Victor stepped behind Elara's chair, his hand resting on her shoulder. "You'll shoot? Risk hitting her?" Lucien's gun hand trembled. "I swear to God, Victor." "Don't make promises you can't keep." Victor's fingers tightened on Elara's shoulder. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to put down your weapon, all of you, and then we're going to have a conversation about how this ends. The only way this ends is with you dead." Bold words for a man with no leverage. Victor's other hand moved to his pocket, pulling out a knife. He pressed the blade against Elara's throat, Not hard enough to cut, but close enough that she felt the cold metal kiss her skin. Elara's breath stopped. Her eyes locked with Lucien's across the warehouse. "I'm sorry," she tried to say with her gaze. "I'm so sorry." Lucien's jaw worked. Sweat beaded on his forehead. Every muscle in his body looked coiled to spring. "Don't," he said, and his voice cracked. "Please, don't hurt her. Then put down the gun." For a long, terrible moment, Lucien didn't move. Then, slowly, he lowered his weapon. On the ground. Lucien set the gun on the concrete. His men followed suit, their expressions grim. Victor's smile was triumphant. "Good. Now kick them away." They did. "Excellent." Victor removed the knife from Elara's throat, and she gasped in a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "Now we can talk like civilized men." "There's nothing civilized about you," Lucien said, his voice low and dangerous. "Maybe not, but I keep my word." Victor walked around the chair, positioning himself between Lucien and Elara. "I told you that if you came after me, there would be consequences. You didn't listen. So now you get to watch what happens when you put someone you love in the crossfire." Lucien's hands clenched. "Whatever you want. Money, territory, my life. It's yours. Just let her go." "Your life?" Victor laughed. "Oh, Lucien, your life is worth nothing compared to what I'm about to take from you." He turned back toward Elara, and the look in his eyes made her blood run cold. "You see, Lucien, the thing about love is that it makes you weak. It gives people leverage. And once someone has leverage," Victor grabbed Elara's hair, yanking her head back, "they can destroy you." Lucien exploded forward, but 3 of Victor's men appeared from the shadows, guns trained on him. He froze, his entire body vibrating with barely contained violence. "Don't," Victor said calmly, "or I'll slit her throat right now." Lucien's breathing was ragged, his eyes wild. "I'll kill you. I don't care how long it takes. I will. You'll do nothing." Victor's grip on Elara's hair tightened. "Because if you move, if you fight, if you do anything except exactly what I tell you, she dies. Understand?" Lucien's jaw worked. Finally, through gritted teeth, he said, "Yes." "Good." Victor released Elara's hair and stepped back. "Now, let's discuss terms." But before he could continue, the warehouse lights went out. Darkness swallowed everything. Elara heard shouts, movement, the sound of bodies hitting concrete. Gunfire erupted, brief staccato bursts that lit the space in violent flashes. Then silence. Elara's heart hammered so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. She couldn't see anything, couldn't tell who was winning, couldn't tell if Lucien was alive or dead. Then hands were on her wrists, cutting the ropes. "It's me!" Lucien's voice rough and close. "I've got you." The ropes fell away. He pulled her up, his hands shaking as they ran over her arms, her face, checking for injuries. "Are you hurt?" "No, I'm okay. Her voice broke. "I'm so sorry. I thought—" "Later." He grabbed her hand and started pulling her toward the door. "We need to move. Now." They ran through the darkness, Lucien's grip on her hand the only thing anchoring her to reality. Behind them, she heard shouting. More gunfire, Victor's voice screaming orders. They burst out into the night air. A car was waiting, engine running, Marcus in the driver's seat. Lucien shoved Elara into the back seat and dove in after her. "Go!" The car peeled out, tires screaming against asphalt. Elara collapsed against Lucien's chest, her entire body shaking. His arms came around her, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. But she didn't care. She needed it, needed him, needed the proof that he was real and alive and here. "I'm sorry," she sobbed into his shirt. "I thought... Natasha said..." "I know." His voice was rough against her hair. "I know what she told you." "I should have trusted you. You were scared." "She manipulated you." His arms tightened. "This isn't your fault." But it felt like her fault. It felt like she'd destroyed everything by running. "Is Victor dead?" "No." Lucien's voice was flat. "But he will be." Elara pulled back slightly, looking up at his face in the dim light. His expression was carved from stone. But his eyes were filled with something dark and final. "Lucien, he put his hands on you." His jaw tightened. He threatened your life. There's no coming back from that. But if you kill him, I don't care what happens to me anymore. His hand came up, cupping her face with a gentleness that contrasted sharply with the violence in his voice. As long as you're safe, nothing else matters. Elara's eyes burned. That's not true. Yes, it is. No. She gripped his shirt, forcing him to look at her. Because if you die, Her voice cracked. I can't lose you. Something shifted in Lucien's expression. Elara, I love you. The words burst out of her, raw and desperate. I know I shouldn't. I know it's insane, but I do. I love you, and I can't watch you throw your life away. Lucien stared at her like she'd just ripped the ground out from under him. Then he kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't careful. It was desperate and fierce and full of all the things neither of them knew how to say. His hand tangled in her hair, pulling her closer, and she kissed him back with everything she had. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Lucien pressed his forehead against hers. I love you too, he whispered. More than anything. More than this empire. More than my own life. Elara's chest ached. Then don't throw it away. I won't. His eyes locked onto hers. But I need to end this. For good. So we can have a chance at something normal. Nothing about us is normal. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. No, but maybe that's okay. The car pulled up to the penthouse and they climbed out. Marcus disappeared to coordinate security, leaving them alone in the ruined living room. Lucien pulled Elara close again, his arms wrapped around her like he was afraid she might vanish. Tomorrow, I'm going to finish this, and then I'm going to take you somewhere far away from all of this. His voice was quiet, but certain. Somewhere you can breathe, somewhere you don't have to be afraid anymore. Elara wanted to believe him, wanted to believe they could escape this nightmare, but deep down, she knew the truth. In Lucien's world, there was no such thing as escape. There was only survival, and the price of survival was written in blood. The dawn came cold and gray, painting the Manhattan skyline in shades of ash. Elara stood at the window of the penthouse, watching the city wake up below. She hadn't slept. Neither had Lucien. They'd spent the night wrapped around each other on the couch, speaking in whispers about everything and nothing, as if words could hold back the violence that was coming. But morning had arrived anyway, and with it, the reckoning. Lucien emerged from his office dressed in all black, tactical gear that made him look less like a businessman and more like what he truly was. A weapon. His face was hard, unreadable, but when his eyes found hers across the room, something softened. You should eat something, he said. Elara shook her head. Her stomach was twisted too tight to hold food. I'm not hungry. Elara, Don't. She crossed to him, her hands reaching for his face. Don't treat me like I'm fragile, not today. Lucien's jaw tightened. His hands came up to cover hers, and for a moment, they just stood there, breathing each other in. I need you to stay here, he said quietly. Marcus will be with you, full security. Nothing gets in or out without clearance. You're leaving me behind. I'm keeping you safe. By walking into a death trap? Her voice cracked. Victor knows you're coming. He'll be ready. I know. Lucien's thumb brushed across her cheek. But I don't have a choice anymore. If I don't end this today, he'll keep coming after you, and eventually, I won't be fast enough to stop him. Elara's chest constricted. She wanted to argue, to beg him to find another way, but she could see in his eyes that the decision was already made. Then I'm coming with you. Absolutely not. Lucien, no. His voice turned sharp. You almost died last night because of my world. I'm not putting you in that position again. You think leaving me here is safer? She pulled away from him, anger flaring in her chest. Victor knows where I am. He has people inside your organization. Natasha proved that. What makes you think I'll be any safer locked in this penthouse than I would be with you? Lucien's expression darkened. Because with me, you'll be in the middle of a war zone. I'm already in one. Her voice rose. The moment you married me, I became a target. Hiding won't change that. I can protect you better if I'm not worried about where you are. Or maybe you'll fight harder if I'm right there. She stepped closer, forcing him to meet her eyes. Maybe you'll be more careful if you know I'm watching. Lucien's jaw worked. She could see the war playing out behind his eyes, the need to keep her safe battling against the logic of her words. Finally, through gritted teeth, he said, "You stay in the car, behind Marcus. You don't move unless I tell you to." Relief and terror flooded through her in equal measure. "Okay. I mean it, Elara. You follow orders, or I'll have Marcus drag you back here." "I will." Lucien stared at her for a long moment, then pulled her against his chest. His arms wrapped around her so tightly she could barely breathe. "If anything happens to you, it won't. If it does..." His voice was rough against her hair. "If something goes wrong, you run. You don't look back. You don't try to save me. You just run." Elara's eyes burned. "I can't promise that." "Yes, you can." "No." She pulled back, looking up at him. "Because I love you, and I'm not leaving you behind, not for anything." Something broke in Lucien's expression. He kissed her, hard and desperate, and she kissed him back with everything she had, pouring all her fear and love into the connection between them. When they finally broke apart, Lucien rested his forehead against hers. "We're going to survive this," he whispered. Elara wanted to believe him, but the cold certainty in her gut told her that not everyone would make it out alive. They left an hour later. 4 cars, 15 men, enough weapons to start a small war. Elara sat in the back seat of the second vehicle, sandwiched between Marcus and another guard whose name she didn't know. Lucien was in the lead car, coordinating with his men through earpieces and encrypted phones. The drive took 30 minutes. They headed north, away from the gleaming towers of Manhattan, and into the industrial outskirts where wealth gave way to warehouses and abandoned lots. The sky remained gray, threatening rain that hadn't yet fallen. No one spoke. The silence was heavy with anticipation and dread. Finally, the cars pulled to a stop in front of a massive concrete building, a former factory that had been converted into Victor's private fortress. High walls topped with razor wire surrounded the property. Security cameras tracked their arrival. Armed guards were visible at every entrance. Lucien stepped out of the lead car, and Elara watched through the tinted window as he surveyed the building. His expression was carved from stone, but she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands flexed at his sides. He turned and walked back to her car. Marcus rolled down the window. "Last chance," Lucien said, his eyes locked on Elara. "You can still go back." "No." His jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. "Stay in the car, no matter what you hear, no matter what you see." "Lucien, promise me." She nodded, even though the promise felt like a lie on her tongue. Lucien held her gaze for one more moment, then turned and signaled his men. They moved toward the building's entrance in coordinated groups, weapons ready, bodies tense. Elara watched them disappear inside, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. Then the waiting began. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. The silence was unbearable. Elara's hands twisted in her lap, her breath coming in short, shallow gasps. Marcus sat beside her, stone-faced, his hand resting on his weapon. "How long will this take?" she whispered. "As long as it needs to." Not an answer, but the only one he could give. 15 minutes. Then from inside the building, the sound of gunfire. Elara flinched violently. Marcus's hand shot out, gripping her arm. "Stay down!" "What's happening?" They made contact. More gunfire. Rapid, overlapping. The sound of a war breaking out behind concrete walls. Elara's chest constricted. She couldn't see anything, couldn't tell who was winning, couldn't tell if Lucien was... She forced herself to stop thinking. 20 minutes. The gunfire continued in sporadic bursts. Elara counted each one, trying to map the sounds into some kind of narrative that made sense. But it was just noise, violent, chaotic, impossible to decipher. Then, abruptly, the shooting stopped. Silence descended like a hammer. Elara's breath caught. "What does that mean?" Marcus didn't answer. His hand tightened on his weapon, his eyes fixed on the building's entrance. Seconds ticked by. Each one felt like an hour. Then the doors burst open. Men stumbled out, Lucien's men, some bleeding, some limping. They moved quickly toward the cars, their faces grim. But Lucien wasn't with them. Elara's blood turned to ice. "Where is he?" Marcus barked orders into his radio, coordinating with the men pouring out of the building. But no one answered Elara's question. "Marcus, where's Lucien?" I don't know. What do you mean you don't know? Her voice rose, panic clawing at her throat. He went in there. He should be... Miss Vale, I need you to stay calm. Don't tell me to stay calm. She grabbed the door handle, trying to yank it open, but it was locked from the outside. Marcus grabbed her shoulders. Elara, stop. You can't... Let me out. No. He's in there. Tears streamed down her face. He could be hurt. He could be... If you go in there, you'll die. The bluntness of it hit her like a slap. She stared at Marcus, her chest heaving. I don't care, she whispered. Well, he does. Marcus's expression was hard. And my orders are to keep you alive, even if it means restraining you. Elara wanted to fight, wanted to scream, but the look in Marcus's eyes told her he would absolutely follow through on his threat. So she sat back, her entire body shaking, and waited. 3 more of Lucien's men emerged from the building, then 2 more. Still no Lucien. Elara's mind spun through every terrible possibility. He was trapped. He was wounded. He was... No. She wouldn't let herself finish that thought. Then, finally, a figure appeared in the doorway. Lucien. He was covered in blood, so much blood that Elara's stomach dropped. He limped heavily, one arm pressed against his side. But he was walking, moving, alive. Relief hit her so hard she nearly sobbed. Marcus radioed something and the car doors unlocked. Elara threw herself out before he could stop her, running toward Lucien. Elara, get back! She didn't listen. She closed the distance between them, her hands reaching for Lucien's face, his chest, his arms, needing to confirm he was real. You're hurt, she choked out. I'm fine. His voice was rough, strained. You're bleeding. Most of it isn't mine. She wanted to believe him, but the way he moved, the tightness around his eyes, told her he was lying. Where's Victor? She asked. Lucien's expression darkened. Still inside, but he's not walking out. Is he dead? Not yet. Lucien's jaw tightened. But he will be. Before Elara could respond, an explosion rocked the building. The blast wave knocked them both to the ground. Elara's ears rang, her vision swimming. Lucien's body covered hers, protecting her from the debris raining down around them. When the world stopped spinning, Elara looked up to see flames pouring from the factory's 2nd floor. Black smoke billowed into the gray sky. What the hell was that? Marcus shouted, running toward them. Victor. Lucien pushed himself up, wincing. He rigged the place to blow. Is he still in there? I don't know. Lucien pulled Elara to her feet, his grip tight on her arm. We need to move, now. They started toward the cars, but another explosion erupted, this one closer. The shockwave threw Elara forward, and she hit the pavement hard. Pain exploded through her shoulder and hip. Lucien was beside her instantly, pulling her up. Can you walk? She nodded, even though her entire body screamed in protest. They ran. Behind them, the building groaned and collapsed in on itself, flames consuming everything. They'd almost reached the cars when gunfire erupted from a side entrance Elara hadn't seen. Victor's remaining men poured out, weapons blazing. Lucien shoved Elara behind one of the vehicles and returned fire. His men scattered, taking cover, engaging the enemy in a firefight that turned the parking lot into a battlefield. Elara pressed herself against the car's metal frame, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might explode. Bullets pinged off the vehicles around them. Glass shattered. Someone screamed. Lucien fired methodically, his movements controlled despite the blood soaking through his shirt. But Elara could see he was slowing down, weakening. Lucien! She grabbed his arm. You need to stop. You're hurt. I'm fine. You're not fine. A bullet struck the car inches from her head, and Lucien immediately pulled her lower, his body shielding hers. Stay down, he growled. But Elara could see what he couldn't. One of Victor's men circling around, getting into position for a clear shot at Lucien's exposed back. She didn't think. She just moved. Elara lunged, shoving Lucien sideways. The bullet that would have killed him tore through her left shoulder instead. The pain was instant and all-consuming. She gasped, her vision widening out for a second. Lucien's face appeared above her, his expression twisted with horror and rage. No, 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 no! He fired 3 shots in rapid succession, and the man who'd shot her dropped. Then Lucien was pressing his hands against her shoulder, trying to stop the bleeding. His hands were shaking. Elara, stay with me. Look at me. She tried to focus on his face, but everything was blurring. I'm okay, she managed. You're not okay. You've been shot. Marcus. Marcus appeared, taking in the scene with one sharp look. We need to get her out of here. I know that! Lucien's voice was raw. He scooped Elara into his arms, ignoring his own injuries, and started toward the car. More gunfire erupted. One of Victor's men broke through the line, charging straight at them. Lucien couldn't shoot. His arms were full of Elara. So Marcus stepped in, taking the man down with 2 precise shots. They reached the car. Lucien climbed in with Elara still in his arms, cradling her against his chest. Drive. Now! The car peeled out, tires screaming. Elara's vision swam. She could feel Lucien's hands pressing against her wound, could hear him talking to her, but the words were getting harder to understand. Stay with me, he was saying. Please, Elara, don't close your eyes. Look at me. Stay with me. She tried. She really tried. But the darkness was pulling her under, and fighting it took more strength than she had left. The last thing she heard before everything went black was Lucien's voice, broken and desperate, saying her name over and over like a prayer. Elara woke to blinding white light and the steady beep of machines. For a moment, she didn't know where she was, didn't remember what had happened. Then the pain in her shoulder flared and everything came rushing back. The factory, the explosion, the gunfire, getting shot. She gasped, trying to sit up, and immediately a hand pressed gently against her uninjured shoulder. Don't move. Lucien. Elara turned her head, and there he was, sitting in a chair beside her bed, looking like hell. His face was pale, dark circles shadowing his eyes, bandages wrapped around his torso beneath a fresh shirt. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. How long? Her voice came out rough, scratchy. 18 hours. His hand moved from her shoulder to her face, his touch impossibly gentle. You scared the hell out of me. I'm okay. You got shot. His voice was flat, but she could hear the emotion beneath it. Because of me. Because you were protecting me. Because I love you. Lucien's expression crumpled. He leaned forward, pressing his forehead against hers. You could have died. But I didn't. Elara, his voice broke. I can't. If I'd lost you. You didn't. She reached up with her good arm, her fingers tangling in his hair. I'm here. We're both here. He kissed her then, softly, carefully, like she might break. When he pulled back, his eyes were wet. Victor? She asked quietly. Lucien's expression hardened. Dead. Confirmed. They pulled his body from the rubble this morning. Relief flooded through her. It's over. Not yet. He sat back, his jaw tight. His organization is in chaos, but there are still loose ends. People loyal to him who might try to retaliate. How long until those loose ends are tied up? A few weeks? Maybe longer. He took her hand, his thumb brushing across her knuckles. But I'm not making you wait through it. Elara frowned. What do you mean? I mean, as soon as you're cleared to travel, we're leaving. Out of the city, out of the country if you want. Somewhere no one will find us. You can't just walk away from your empire. Watch me. His eyes locked onto hers with absolute certainty. I told you, nothing matters more than keeping you safe. And if that means burning it all down, then that's what I'll do. Elara's chest ached. Lucien, I almost lost you yesterday. His grip on her hand tightened. I watched you bleed out in my arms because you were stupid enough to take a bullet meant for me. And in that moment, I realized something. What? That none of this, the power, the money, the respect, means anything if you're not alive to share it with me. His voice was rough with emotion. So I'm choosing you. Over everything else, every time. Tears spilled down Elara's cheeks. Where would we go? Anywhere you want. I don't care where we go. She pulled him closer with her good arm. As long as I'm with you. Lucien's arms came around her carefully, holding her like she was something precious and breakable. Then we'll figure it out. Together. They stayed like that for a long time, wrapped in each other, neither willing to let go. Outside the hospital room, the city continued its violent churn. But inside, for just a moment, there was peace. 4 days later, Elara was discharged. The bullet had gone straight through, clean entry and exit wounds, no major arteries hit. She'd been lucky. The doctor said she'd need physical therapy, that her shoulder would ache for months, but she would heal. Lucien hadn't left her side the entire time. They returned to the penthouse to find it had been cleaned, the blood stains scrubbed away, the bullet holes patched, the shattered windows replaced. It looked almost normal, except nothing about their lives was normal anymore. Elara stood in the living room, taking in the space that had been both her prison and her sanctuary. What happens now? Lucien came up behind her, his arms wrapping around her waist. Now we pack. Just like that? Just like that? He kissed the side of her neck. I've already made arrangements. We leave tomorrow night. Where? Italy. Small town on the coast. No one will know us there. Elara leaned back against him, letting his warmth seep into her. And your business? Marcus is taking over. He's been with me long enough to know how things work. Lucien's voice was calm, certain. I'm done with this life. Can you really just walk away? I already have. He turned her gently to face him. The moment you got shot, I made my choice, and I'm not looking back. Elara searched his face, looking for doubt, for regret, but all she saw was determination. Okay, she whispered. Italy. Lucien smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes. Italy. They spent the rest of the day preparing, packing clothes, sorting through documents, making final arrangements. It felt surreal, like they were playing at normal life instead of actually living it. But as evening fell and they sat together on the couch, Lucien's arms around her, her head resting on his chest, Elara let herself believe it might actually be real. They might actually get their happy ending. The knock on the door shattered that illusion. Lucien tensed immediately. Stay here. He stood, pulling his weapon from the holster he still wore, and moved toward the door. Marcus should have been guarding the elevator. No one should have been able to get up here without clearance. Elara's heart hammered as Lucien checked the security feed. His expression went cold. What is it? She asked. He didn't answer. He just opened the door. Natasha stood in the hallway, but she wasn't alone. Behind her, pressed against her back with a gun to her head, was Marcus. His face was bloody, his expression grim, and holding the gun was a man Elara had never seen before, tall, scarred, with dead eyes that promised violence. Hello, Lucien, Natasha said, her voice shaking. I'm sorry. They made me... Shut up. The man shoved her forward into the penthouse. Marcus stumbled in after her, followed by 3 more armed men. Lucien's weapon came up instantly, but the man pressed his gun harder against Marcus's head. I wouldn't. Lucien froze. His jaw worked. Who the hell are you? Dmitry Volkov. The man smiled, revealing gold teeth. Victor's brother. And you just made a very big mistake. Elara's blood turned to ice. Lucien's expression didn't change, but she could see the calculations running behind his eyes. Victor's dead. I know. Dimitri's smile widened. And now you're going to pay for it. What do you want? What do I want? Dmitri laughed, a harsh, grating sound. I want to watch you suffer the way my brother suffered. I want to take everything from you, starting with her. His eyes slid to Elara, and terror spiked through her chest. Lucien stepped sideways, putting himself between Dmitri and Elara. You touch her, and I'll... You'll what? Dmitri shoved Marcus to his knees. You're outnumbered, outgunned, and if you make one wrong move, your man here dies. Then your pretty little wife. Then you. The air in the room felt like it might explode. Elara watched Lucien's face, saw the war raging behind his eyes. He was looking for an opening, a way out, some path that didn't end with everyone dead. But there wasn't one. So here's what's going to happen, Dmitri continued. You're going to put down your weapon, and then we're all going to take a little trip, somewhere private, somewhere I can take my time. Lucien's hands tightened on his gun. And if I refuse? Then I start with him. Dmitri cocked the hammer against Marcus's head. Your choice. For a terrible moment, no one moved. Then Lucien slowly lowered his weapon. Good. Dmitri's smile was triumphant. Now kick it toward me. Lucien did. Excellent. Now. Marcus moved. It happened so fast, Elara almost didn't see it. Marcus twisted, grabbing Dimitri's arm and forcing the gun away from his head. Dimitri pulled the trigger, but the shot went wild. Lucien dove for his weapon. Dimitri's men opened fire, and the penthouse erupted into chaos. Elara hit the floor, covering her head as bullets tore through the space. She heard Lucien shouting, Marcus roaring, the deafening crack of gunfire overlapping in violent percussion. Then hands grabbed her arms, dragging her backward. She screamed, kicked, fought, but whoever had her was too strong. She was hauled toward the door, and the last thing she saw before being pulled into the hallway was Lucien's face, twisted with rage and terror, as he fought to reach her. Their eyes met across the chaos, and Elara knew with absolute certainty that whatever happened next would determine if they both survived, or if this was where their story ended. Elara fought like a trapped animal. She twisted in the grip of Dimitri's man, her nails clawing at his arms, her teeth seeking any exposed flesh. Behind her, the gunfire continued, deafening blasts that made her ears ring and her heart hammer against her ribs. The man dragged her toward the elevator, his hand clamped over her mouth to muffle her screams. She bit down hard, tasting blood, and he cursed viciously but didn't let go. They were almost to the elevator when a single gunshot rang out, different from the others, sharper, closer. The man holding her jerked once, then collapsed. Elara stumbled forward, gasping for air. She turned to see Lucien standing in the penthouse doorway, his weapon still raised, his face a mask of cold fury. "Don't move," he said to the remaining men in the hallway. But they did. They raised their weapons. Lucien was faster. The fight was brutal and efficient. 3 shots. 3 bodies. Lucien moved through the violence like it was choreographed, his movements precise despite the blood soaking through his bandages. When the last man fell, Lucien crossed the space to Elara in 3 long strides. His hands gripped her face, his eyes scanning her frantically. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, unable to speak. "Stay behind me." He pulled her back toward the penthouse, where the sounds of fighting had died down to heavy breathing and groans. Inside, the scene was carnage. 2 of Dimitri's men lay dead. Marcus was on his knees, bleeding from a wound on his side, but alive. Natasha cowered in the corner, her face white with terror. And in the center of the room, Lucien's gun pressed against his temple, was Dimitri. The Russian's face was twisted with rage and pain. Blood ran from his nose, his lips split open, but his eyes burned with hatred so intense it made the air feel heavy. "Let her go," Dimitri said through gritted teeth, "and I let you live." Lucien's laugh was harsh, humorless. "You think you have leverage here? I have men outside, waiting. If I don't walk out of here, then they'll die too." Lucien's voice was cold, final. "I'm done playing games, Dimitri. Your brother is dead. His empire is scattered, and now you're going to join him." "Wait," Dimitri's voice cracked. "Wait, I can pay you. Whatever you want. Name your price." "There is no price." Lucien's finger moved to the trigger. "Some debts can only be paid in blood." "Please." Dimitri's eyes were wide now, animal fear replacing the hatred. "Please, I have a family." "So did the men you killed." Lucien's expression didn't change. "So did the women Victor destroyed. So did everyone who got in your way." Elara watched from across the room, her chest tight. She should have felt something, horror, pity, anything, but all she felt was cold certainty. This was justice, ugly and brutal and necessary. "Lucien," Dimitri whispered, "please." "Close your eyes, Elara," Lucien said quietly, not looking away from Dimitri. She didn't. The gunshot echoed through the penthouse. Dimitri's body crumpled to the floor. Silence descended like a curtain. Lucien stood over the body for a long moment, his chest heaving, his hands steady despite everything. Then he turned to Marcus. "How bad?" "I'll live." Marcus pressed a hand to his side, his face tight with pain. "But we need to clean this up, fast." Lucien nodded. He crossed to Natasha, who shrank back against the wall. "Did they force you to bring them here?" She nodded frantically. "They had my sister. They said they'd kill her if I didn't." "Where is she now?" "Safe house, downtown. I can give you the address." "Do it." Lucien pulled out his phone and handed it to her. "Marcus will send someone to get her." Natasha's hands shook as she typed. When she finished, she looked up at Lucien with tears streaming down her face. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. You should be. Lucien's voice was hard. But you were also a victim, so you get one chance. Disappear, change your name, start over somewhere Victor's people can't find you, and if I ever see you again, you won't. Natasha stood on trembling legs. I swear, you'll never see me again. Lucien stepped aside, letting her pass. She fled without looking back. Then it was just the four of them, Lucien, Elara, Marcus, and the bodies scattered across the penthouse floor. We need to leave, Marcus said. Now, before more of them show up. Agreed. Lucien moved to Elara, his hands gentle on her arms. Can you walk? Yes. Then we're going. Right now. No packing. No goodbyes. We disappear tonight. Elara nodded. Her entire body felt numb, disconnected, like she was watching herself from a distance. They left the penthouse in ruins behind them. The car ride was silent. Marcus drove despite his injury, his jaw tight with pain. Lucien sat in the back with Elara, his arm around her shoulders, holding her against his chest like he was afraid she might vanish. They didn't go to the airport, too obvious. Instead, Marcus drove them to a private airfield 2 hours north of the city. A small jet was waiting, engines already running. Where to? The pilot asked as they boarded. Lucien looked at Elara. Your choice. She thought about it. About running. About hiding. About spending the rest of her life looking over her shoulder. Then she thought about the bookstore in Brooklyn. About quiet mornings and dusty shelves and the person she used to be. Somewhere with books, she said quietly. Somewhere quiet. Lucien's thumb brushed across her cheek. I know just the place. The flight took 14 hours. They landed in a small coastal town in southern Italy, exactly as Lucien had promised. The sun was setting as they descended, painting the Mediterranean in shades of gold and crimson. A car was waiting. No driver, just keys and directions to a villa on the outskirts of town. Elara watched the landscape roll past. Narrow roads lined with olive trees, stone buildings weathered by centuries, the sea glittering in the distance. It looked like something from a postcard. Unreal. Too beautiful to be real. But it was real. And for the first time in months, she felt like she could breathe. The villa was small but perfect. Whitewashed walls, terracotta roof, a garden overlooking the water. Inside, the furniture was simple, worn wooden tables, soft linens, shelves already filled with books in half a dozen languages. Lucien had planned this. Long before the violence, long before Dimitri, he'd been preparing an escape for them. When did you arrange all this? Elara asked, running her fingers along the spines of the books. 2 weeks ago. Lucien stood in the doorway, watching her. Right after Victor sent the first threat, I knew we'd need somewhere to run. You were already planning to leave. I was already planning to protect you. He crossed the room, his hands gentle on her waist. Whatever it took. Elara turned in his arms, looking up at him. His face was exhausted, bruised, marked by violence. But his eyes were softer than she'd ever seen them. What happens now? She whispered. Now we heal. His thumb brushed across her cheek. We learn to be normal. We figure out who we are without the guns and the blood. Can we do that? I don't know. His honesty made her chest ache. But I want to try. Elara rose on her toes and kissed him, soft and slow and full of promise. When they broke apart, Lucien rested his forehead against hers. I love you, he said quietly, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life proving I deserve you. You already proved it. Her fingers tangled in his hair. You chose me, over everything else. That's all I ever needed. They stood like that for a long time, wrapped in each other, letting the silence settle around them like a blanket. The first few weeks were strange. Lucien didn't know how to exist without violence lurking around every corner. He woke with nightmares, reaching for weapons that weren't there. He paced the villa at night, checking locks and windows, unable to shake the paranoia that had kept him alive for so long. But slowly, gradually, he started to soften. He learned to sleep through the night without jerking awake at every sound. He learned to walk through the town without cataloging exits and threats. He learned to sit still without his hand instinctively reaching for a gun. And Elara watched him transform from a weapon back into a man. She had her own struggles, The bullet wound in her shoulder healed slowly, leaving a scar that ached on cold mornings. She still flinched at loud noises, still had moments where panic would surge through her chest for no reason. But she also learned to be someone other than the terrified girl hiding behind bookshelves. She started walking through the town without fear, started conversations with the locals in broken Italian, started believing that maybe she deserved to take up space in the world. 3 months after they arrived, Elara found a small bookstore for sale in the town square. It was dusty and neglected, its shelves half empty, its windows clouded with grime. But the bones were good, the location was perfect, and the owner, an elderly woman with kind eyes, was looking for someone to love it the way she once had. Elara bought it with money Lucien had transferred from accounts Victor would never trace. And together, they spent weeks cleaning, painting, restoring it to life. Lucien built new shelves with his scarred hands. Elara organized books by language and genre. They worked side by side in companionable silence, building something that belonged only to them. When the store finally reopened, the locals came cautiously at first, curious about the quiet American woman and her intense husband who spoke Italian with a rough accent. But Elara's gentle smile and genuine love for books won them over. Slowly, the store became a gathering place, a refuge, exactly what it had always been meant to be. And Lucien, the man who'd once ruled New York's underworld with an iron fist, learned to make espresso for customers and recommend novels he'd never read before. He was terrible at customer service, gruff and direct in ways that sometimes made people uncomfortable, but he was trying, and that was enough. 6 months after leaving New York, Marcus visited. He arrived without warning, appearing in the bookstore one afternoon with his arm in a sling and his face drawn with exhaustion. Lucien went rigid the moment he saw him. "What happened?" "Relax. I'm not here to drag you back." Marcus sank into one of the reading chairs, wincing. "Though things have been interesting since you left." "How bad?" "Bad at first. Victor's remaining allies tried to consolidate. There were skirmishes, power struggles." Marcus's jaw tightened. "But we held, and eventually they fractured. Some fled, some died. The rest accepted the new order." "And you?" "I'm done." Marcus said it flatly, like he was reporting the weather. "I held things together long enough to make sure your exit was clean. Made sure no one came looking for you. But I'm not built to run an empire, so I handed it off to someone who is, and I walked away." Lucien studied him for a long moment. "What will you do?" "Figure it out." Marcus's eyes flicked to Elara, then back to Lucien. "Maybe find what you found, something worth protecting that isn't soaked in blood." "I hope you do." Marcus nodded. He stood, moving toward the door. Then he paused and looked back. "You made the right choice, leaving. Some men aren't meant for that life, and you—" He smiled slightly. "You were always better than the rest of us pretended to be." Then he was gone, disappearing into the Italian afternoon. Elara came to stand beside Lucien, her hand slipping into his. "Are you okay?" "Yeah." Lucien's grip tightened on her fingers. "I am." And he meant it. A year after arriving in Italy, Elara woke to find Lucien standing on the villa's terrace, watching the sunrise over the Mediterranean. She wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and joined him, leaning against his side. He pulled her close automatically, his arm around her waist. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "How different this is." His voice was quiet. "From what I thought my life would be." "Better or worse?" "Better." He looked down at her, and the softness in his expression made her chest ache. "So much better, it terrifies me sometimes." "Why does it terrify you?" "Because I don't know if I deserve it." His jaw tightened. "All the things I've done, all the lives I've destroyed, and somehow I ended up here, with you, living like a normal person." Elara turned in his arms, forcing him to meet her eyes. "You're not the same person who did those things. I'm still responsible for them." "I know." She reached up, cupping his face. "But you're also the man who chose to walk away, who chose love over power, who chose to be better." Her thumb brushed across his cheek. "That has to count for something." Lucien's eyes closed. When he opened them again, they were wet. "I don't know how to stop feeling guilty." "Then don't." Her voice was gentle. "Carry it. Let it remind you of who you were, but don't let it destroy who you're becoming. He pulled her tight against his chest, his face buried in her hair. How did you get so wise? I learned from watching you. She smiled against his shirt. You taught me that broken things can heal, even when the scars stay. They stood like that as the sun climbed higher, painting the world in shades of gold. And in that moment, Elara realized something profound. They weren't the same people who'd met in that Brooklyn bookstore. The shy girl who'd hidden behind books was gone. The ruthless crime lord who'd ruled through fear was gone. They'd been burned down and rebuilt into something new, something neither of them had expected to become. 2 years after leaving New York, Elara discovered she was pregnant. She stared at the test for a long time, her hands trembling, her mind spinning. They'd never discussed children, never talked about the future beyond surviving the present, but now the future was here demanding attention. She found Lucien in the bookstore restocking shelves. We need to talk. He looked up, immediately reading the seriousness in her expression. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. She took a breath. I'm pregnant. Lucien went completely still. The book in his hand slipped and hit the floor with a soft thud. He couldn't seem to finish the sentence. Pregnant. About 8 weeks, I think. For a moment, she couldn't read his expression at all. Then, slowly, his face crumpled. He crossed the space between them and pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. Are you happy? She whispered against his chest. I'm terrified. His voice was rough. What if I'm a terrible father? What if I... You won't be. She pulled back, looking up at him. You're not that person anymore. But what if... Lucien. She took his face in her hands. Look at me. You spent your whole life protecting people who didn't deserve it. Imagine what you'll do for someone who does. Something shifted in his expression. The fear didn't disappear, but it was joined by something else. Hope. A baby, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. We're going to have a baby. Yes. I don't know how to do this. Neither do I. She smiled. So we'll figure it out together, like everything else. Lucien's hand moved to her stomach, still flat, still showing no sign of the life growing inside. His touch was reverent, gentle, full of wonder. I'm going to do better, he said quietly, for them. I'm going to be better. You already are. They stood in the bookstore surrounded by stories of other people's lives and began imagining what their own story would become. Their daughter was born on a spring morning when the air smelled like lemon blossoms and the sea was calm as glass. They named her Sophia. She had Elara's eyes and Lucien's dark hair and a scream that could wake the entire villa. She was perfect. Lucien held her for the first time with hands that had killed men, cradled her against a chest marked by scars from violence, and wept. I'm sorry, he whispered to the tiny bundle in his arms. I'm sorry for everything I was before you, but I promise I'll be worthy of you. Elara watched from the hospital bed, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. She thought about this girl she'd been 2 years ago, terrified, invisible, convinced she didn't deserve to take up space in the world. And she thought about the woman she'd become, scarred but strong, quiet but unafraid, a mother, a wife, a person who'd survived hell and come out the other side. What are you thinking? Lucien asked, looking up from Sophia's face. That we made it. Her voice was thick with emotion. Against everything, we actually made it. Lucien crossed to the bed, sitting beside her with Sophia still cradled in one arm. His other arm went around Elara, pulling her close. We did, he said quietly, and I'm never taking that for granted. They sat together, 3 people who shared blood and scars and an impossible love story, and watched the Italian sun paint the hospital room in gold. 5 years passed. The bookstore thrived. Sophia grew into a wild, fearless child who spoke 3 languages and had her father wrapped around her tiny finger. The villa became a home filled with laughter and arguments, and all the messy, beautiful chaos of normal life. Lucien's nightmares became less frequent. His hands, once so comfortable with weapons, learned to braid his daughter's hair and build sandcastles and turn pages in bedtime stories. Elara's shoulder still ached on cold mornings. She still had moments where the past would crash over her without warning, but they became rarer. And when they came, Lucien was there to anchor her back to the present. They were happy. Not in the fairy tale way where everything was perfect, but in the real, earned way that came from surviving darkness together. One evening, after Sophia was asleep, Elara and Lucien sat on the terrace overlooking the sea. "Do you ever regret it?" Elara asked. "Walking away from everything you built." Lucien was quiet for a moment, considering. "Sometimes I miss the certainty, the clarity. In that world you always knew who the enemy was. And now? Now the enemy is my own guilt, my past, the things I can never undo." He took her hand, threading their fingers together. "But I wouldn't go back. Not for anything." "Why not?" "Because that man, the one I was before, he didn't know how to love. He knew how to possess, how to control, how to protect." Lucien's grip tightened on her hand, but he didn't know how to just be with someone. "And now? Now I wake up every morning next to you. I make breakfast for our daughter. I shelve books and recommend stories and live a life so ordinary it would have bored me to death 5 years ago." He turned to look at her, and the emotion in his eyes made her chest ache. "And I've never been happier." Elara leaned her head against his shoulder. "I'm glad you found me. I'm glad you wrote those letters. Even though they were lies." "They weren't all lies." His voice was soft. "The parts about hope, about choosing to see beauty in darkness, those were real. And they saved me long before I ever walked into that bookstore." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge one by one above the Mediterranean. "Lucien?" "Yeah?" "Thank you." "For what?" "For giving me a choice." Her voice was thick. "Even when you took away all the others, you gave me the choice to love you, and I did. And I'd choose it again, every time." Lucien pulled her close, his face buried in her hair. "I don't deserve you." "No," she agreed, "but you earned me. And that's not the same thing, but it's enough." Years continued to pass. Sophia grew older, asking questions about her parents' past that they answered honestly but carefully. She knew her father had once lived a different life. She knew violence had marked them both, but she also knew they'd chosen each other, chosen her, chosen love over everything else. And she grew up fierce and kind, a perfect blend of them both. The bookstore remained a constant. Some days were busy, filled with tourists and locals. Other days were quiet, just Elara and her books and the soft sound of pages turning. Lucien never fully lost his edge. He moved through the world with a wariness that came from years of survival, but he learned to channel it into protection rather than violence. He taught Sophia to defend herself, to be aware, to never let fear control her. But he also taught her to be gentle, to love stories, to see the beauty in quiet moments. He became the father he never had, the man he never thought he could be. And Elara watched him transform completely, falling more in love with him every day. On their 10th anniversary, they stood on the same terrace where they'd had so many conversations. Sophia was away with friends, giving them rare time alone. 10 years, Elara said, leaning against the railing. "Can you believe it?" "No." Lucien came up behind her, his arms wrapping around her waist. "Some days I still wake up expecting it all to be a dream." "A good dream or a bad one?" "Good." His lips brushed against her temple. "Always good." Elara turned in his arms, looking up at him. The years had softened his face, added silver to his dark hair, carved deeper lines around his eyes. But he was still the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen. "Do you remember what you said to me that night in the warehouse?" "Which part?" "You said you'd burn the city down before you let anyone hurt me." Her hand came up, resting over his heart. "And you did. You burned down your entire empire, for me. I'd do it again." "I know," she smiled. "But you don't have to anymore. We're safe. We're free. We're exactly where we're supposed to be." Lucien's eyes closed. When he opened them again, they were wet. "I spent so many years being afraid of dying, afraid of losing, afraid of being weak." His voice was rough with emotion. "But the only thing I'm afraid of now is waking up one day and realizing I don't deserve this." "You do deserve it." Elara's hands came up to cup his face. Not because you're perfect, not because you've erased your past, but because you chose to be different. You chose to be better, and you've spent 10 years proving that choice wasn't a lie. Elara, I love you. The words were simple but held a decade of weight. I love the man you were who wrote back to my letters. I love the man who came to find me. I love the man who chose me over power. And I love the man you've become. The father, the husband, the person who shelves books and makes terrible espresso and still checks the locks every night, even though we're safe. Lucien pulled her tight against his chest, his face buried in her hair. His shoulders shook with emotion he'd spent a lifetime learning to release. Thank you, he whispered, for saving me. You saved yourself. She held him tighter. I just gave you a reason to. They stood wrapped in each other as the sun set over the Mediterranean, painting the sky in shades of fire and gold. And in that moment, Elara realized something she'd known for years, but never quite put into words. The most feared man in New York had never been her greatest fear. He'd been her greatest love. And that love, messy and scarred and hard-won, had transformed them both into people they never imagined they could be. The bookstore in Brooklyn was long gone, sold to new owners who didn't know its history. The penthouse in Manhattan was occupied by strangers. The empire Lucien had built was scattered to the winds. Its king vanished into legend. But here, in a small coastal town in Italy, two people who'd been broken by violence learned to be whole again. They raised their daughter. They served their customers. They read books and made love and argued about small things that didn't matter and held each other through nightmares that still occasionally came. They lived. Not happily ever after, because real life didn't work that way. But happily enough. And that, Elara thought, as she watched her husband's face soften in the fading light, was more than either of them had ever dared to hope for. The story didn't end with triumph or tragedy. It ended with survival, with choice, with two people who'd been forged in darkness, learning to exist in light. And if that wasn't a happy ending, it was at least an honest one, which in the end was all that mattered.